It's my pleasure to introduce Smrita Choubey. Thank you, Mrs. Choubey, for providing us with the finale on our Cultural Affairs lecture series, Cannabis, Changing a Weed to a Resource. I first met Mrs. Choubey at a panel discussion in the Catskills Cannabis Consortium in Narrowsburg last year. And at the forum, I was really impressed with Smrita's vision for utilizing cannabis in regenerative farming practices. Smrita studied economics at the University of Chicago and received her MBA from Columbia Business School. She started her career in healthcare investment banking at JP Morgan in New York, where she gained a deep understanding of the economics of American hospitals and the healthcare systems. She also worked at American Express in mergers and acquisitions and corporate finance in the New York and London offices. Now, Mrs. Choubey is a fifth-generation farmer whose family began producing medicinal herbs in northern India since 1881. And this background allowed her to pivot from her successful career on Wall Street into one of fulfilling her passion to help others. Smrita started her business at Vita Farms to pursue her passion to revive the use of cannabis, which has been practiced for its medicinal properties for thousands of years. I'm excited to have you here, Smrita, to share your knowledge and expertise. So during the lecture tonight, feel free to post your questions in the chat session, as there'll be a small, short session of question and answering, Q&A after the talk. So without further ado, I welcome Smrita Choubey, founder and CEO of Vita Farms. Thank you, Smrita.
Hello all. Thank you so much, Monty, for that really nice introduction. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you tonight. I'm just going to share my screen here. And if you could just please confirm when you can see that. All good. Okay, great. So hello, everyone. My name is Smrita Choubey, and as Monty mentioned, I'm the founder of a hopeful cannabis company called Vita Farms. We are pursuing licenses in both New York and New Jersey. We have a 500-acre farm in Sullivan County, as well as a 250-acre farm in northern New Jersey. And I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about what I'm building, as well as the future of regenerative cannabis, something that is a very important thing for everyone to know about, as well as, what are the broader implications for how we can build resiliency as a civilization, as a society, as a community, through regenerative economics. We're going to talk a little bit about what's actually going on in New York, just to summarize, what's at stake. I know this is, there's been several different lectures on cannabis in New York, but, just to set the context, I want to then also talk about some of the broader problems we're facing as a society and how cannabis can help us kind of remediate some of those things. I want to talk about regenerative economics. What is that? What does that mean? What does it mean to regenerate? And how do we tie that into conscious capitalism? I want to talk a little bit about the ancient history of cannabis and things that we can learn about it. And then really go into how we build resilient local communities. So to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about my background. I like to say that I have a heart of a yogi and the mind of a banker. Everything I do really starts with a deep intention and perhaps even a prayer, you could say, of something I want to see in the world. And then I kind of have my left brain with my banking background, try to figure out how do we actually make this work? How do we actually make money while doing it? How do I pay my employees, make payroll, make rent, all of that good stuff? So as Monty mentioned earlier, I'm a fifth-generation descendant of an agricultural family. My family, both sides of my family are generational farmers. We've had our farmland since the 1800s, and medicinal plants and organic foods is what they grow on that farmland. Very interestingly, cannabis grows in the wild in that part of the world. And so therefore, I just come from a region and a people that simply know a lot about cannabis, and all of its uses are well documented and well celebrated. Of course, there's recreational cannabis use, and there's also medicinal cannabis use. There's also spiritual cannabis use. So I have seen throughout my life that there are many, many different uses to this plant. And although in modern society, in modern culture, it's really associated much more as a drug, and certainly that's a stigma that I come up against fairly often as I am focused on trying to build my brand is how do we get over the stigma of cannabis as a drug versus trying to rebrand cannabis as a medicine and a wellness tool. This is some of the knowledge that I really want to bring back from the ancient times to help provide a little bit more context on what cannabis really is. So I had the privilege of growing up with yoga and meditation, as well as Ayurvedic medicine, which is a holistic science. And it really helped me understand that cannabis could be used as a much broader part of a wellness routine. Later in my life, I started my career at JP Morgan doing healthcare investment banking. So I just did a lot of math over a lot of years, and I discovered that basically the economics just didn't make sense to me. What I realized was that this industry is excellent for shareholders. It's excellent if you're looking to make money off of healthcare stocks. But if you are an individual American just looking to live a healthy, happy life, this is not made for that intention. I mean, it is a for-profit industry, and I'm not even commenting on the ethics of it. I mean, this is just the law. I mean, if you read any financial report of any healthcare organization, the first thing you'll find is that their primary goal is a fiduciary duty to shareholders to optimize shareholder wealth. That's just the reality of life. So that to me just caused a little bit of a schism in my brain. I thought, wait a minute, who's helping everyday Americans simply just be healthy? Perhaps we're missing something here. So what I learned from my family and what I learned from the agricultural practices and wellness practices I saw in India, in rural India, where, you know, perhaps people didn't have all the TVs and the Barbies and all the material items, but I did notice that people were very, very healthy. In my villages where my parents come from, you can't really tell how old women are. They don't have wrinkles. You can only tell from people's hands how old they actually are. And I started thinking about, why is that? How is everybody so healthy, and how are people living such long lives? And it really seemed to stem into the fact that they were living lifestyles that were fully in alignment with nature. They were using plant-based medicines, a lot of superfoods in their daily diet, and they just had the whole health and wellness thing really down pat, even if it was rural India and they didn't have all the material items. So about 3 years ago in 2019, I left my very stable and cushy job to join the Wild West of the cannabis industry. And it's been such a journey ever since. Excited to share a little bit more about what I've seen and what I've done in those 3 years. And the reason I left is that I had a mission to do something bigger. What I saw was that there was two main industries that were heavily challenged, that were really creating some of these negative effects on everybody's health, which is really a lot of problems that I saw within agriculture and healthcare more broadly. So before I get into some of the bigger problems we're facing, I wanted to set the context on what we're actually dealing with here, right? So why are we all here? Why are we excited? So to set the context, New Yorkers consume more cannabis than any other population on planet Earth. So as you can see in this chart, New York is technically, it's still illegal to buy and sell cannabis, and we still consume more than double what Los Angeles consumes. So 77 metric tons of cannabis a year, about $5 billion of trade. It really goes to show, it really makes you think about what the rule of law is, right? Because the government tried to ban cannabis, and yet here we are. It's been happening ever since. And so it really also makes you think about what is the power of cannabis as a plant, that even when the government chooses to make it illegal, even when they say that if we catch you with this stuff, we're going to send you to jail, we'll take your property, we're going to destroy your family. Nonetheless, people have put their lives on the line to keep the economics of this plant alive. And more importantly, people are still buying it, regardless of all of the social implications, the economic implications. So this always had a question mark in my head of, what are we actually dealing with here? We're dealing with a very powerful force here, aren't we? That people are willing to risk their lives to keep this economy going. They're willing to risk their livelihoods to actually consume it. So something very interesting here that caused me to ponder, what is cannabis? What are we actually dealing with here? And I've been thinking that for many years. So what does this mean for New York, right? So one of the interesting statistics that I saw was that in any state that adult use cannabis has been legalized, we've actually seen a decline in wine and beer. So 81% of cannabis users think that it is safer than alcohol. And we've seen 16 to 14% monthly declines in the total amount that consumers are spending on wine and beer. So to me, I was like, wow, that is a pretty compelling statistic that in a day and age where all of us are super stressed, we're all overstimulated, overstressed, people are actually replacing some fun but less healthy habits like drinking alcohol with cannabis. So as I started really deep diving into that, I developed a thesis that, as the cannabis industry matures in New York, I really felt that over time, people would start viewing it in a much more sophisticated manner, right? You would never brag about drinking wine that was grown indoors, but you would definitely brag about drinking wine that was grown in the beautiful terroir of Burgundy or Chianti or any one of these storied places, right? So because of that, we made our mission to create the Napa Valley of cannabis with our vineyards in New York and New Jersey. So we think of our cannabis farms more of as a vineyard perspective. We thought, look, once adult use legalization actually happens, we want to create a very safe, legal, and luxurious environment where people can actually spend time in nature and consume cannabis and really learn about it in its natural setting. This is something that you cannot do, obviously, if you have an indoor warehouse grow, and something that we thought was a very, very good complement to the overall regenerative agriculture business model that we wanted to put together. So this is how we're thinking about it. How do we create these beautiful experiences for people to leave New York City and be able to go spend time in nature and also spend money up there? But before we really get into that part, I just was also thinking, this is also really about a lot more than just cannabis and just tourism. The ability to create a business model like this actually could have a lot of side benefits in a multitude of other ways. So in order to really explore the broader implications of, great, we're going to build some cannabis vineyards, but what does that do? Are there any bigger, broader implications for society? And can we actually use this business model to help and support local communities in a way that perhaps isn't as obvious as it might seem on first glance? So one of the major problems facing our society today is mental health. Mental health was already a major issue before the pandemic, and since the pandemic, it's gotten even worse. And some of the people that I feel for the most are college students and students in general who are in high school and younger. I know that when I went to college back in the day from 2006 to 2010, being there in person with my friends, being able to just experience that college life was one of the best and most formative experiences of my life. And it really pains me that young people today don't necessarily have that same type of experience. But it's beyond that. People of every age actually are suffering right now. 77% of Americans are now suffering from chronic stress. 51 million Americans are on prescription drugs for anxiety and depression. 34% increase in prescription drugs for mental health since COVID. I mean, that is a problem. That is a big problem facing society. And what's happening because of that? People are also suffering from the dangerous side effects of these drugs. So that is what I think the real drug problem is our existing and now growing addiction to prescription drugs, which don't actually fix your long-term depression. I mean, taking something like Xanax is a wonderful way to calm down short-term anxiety, but is it a long-term solution? No, but our mainstream healthcare system is not really talking to us about what alternatives are. And then beyond healthcare, there's another really big problem, which is what's going on with agriculture. So since 2018, I have been spending a lot of my time trying to understand the economics of agriculture. I've met more than 100 farmers, visited dozens of different farms, trying to understand what are the economics of agriculture, because for totally selfish reasons, right? I wanted to start my cannabis farm, and I wanted to get the facts on how can I make this a sustainable business model. So there was a very stark and troubling truth that I came across, which is that small organic farming is slowly becoming extinct. I asked every single farmer whose farm was on sale that I went to look at in the process of finding my own farms, why are you selling? And every single one cited the fact that they just were not making any money. Most farms in America are either breaking even or operating at a loss. That means that farmers are basically paying us to feed us. And that to me is an absolute tragedy. At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the first things that I worried about when the world started shutting down and they were talking about shelter in place and all this stuff, my first fear was like, wait a minute, what if the farmers shelter in place? Because they're going to feed themselves, obviously, but like, what about me in the city? Like, where's my food going to come from? And I started really thinking about the resiliency of local food supply chains. I started thinking about food deserts. I started thinking about, who's actually growing my food and where do they come from and where am I going to go in an apocalypse type of situation? So I started learning a lot about the economics here, and there's a major problem. The average age of US farmers is 60 years old, and it's rising. So that really means that young people are just not getting attracted to careers in agriculture, and it makes absolute sense why that is. It's a terrible industry to get into the way it is. It's super high risk, very low reward. It's extremely expensive to pull off. You have to pay a lot of labor costs. You have to pay for a lot of equipment. And then the financial margins are extremely low. And in fact, the way the economics work is that you have big companies, big distributors that are actually gobbling up the lion's share of the margins, and farmers are left with like pennies per head of lettuce. So this really means that a lot of small agriculture, small local family farms are going bankrupt. So this really hit close to home. As a fifth generation farmer, descendant of an agricultural family, and full disclosure, my family are all gentlemen farmers, but every generation is raised to care about the land, and we're raised to say, you're not going to sell this thing, you're going to be a land steward, whether you like it or not. And so it broke my heart to see that these family farms that had had their land for 100 years, 150 plus years, they were not able to sustain themselves because the latest generation was like, no, it makes no sense for me. It's hard work and I'm going to lose money doing it. So why would I do that? What does that mean? That means that the industry is getting consolidated under corporate agriculture. And that is a huge problem for us. Why? Because corporate agriculture is known for doing chemical farming, which degrades our soil quality. It creates non-resilient agricultural loops that rely on things like fertilizers, which right now are mostly coming from Ukraine, and prices are rising, and that's a problem. But more importantly than that, the GMO foods that they are growing are not healthy for us. In the last couple of years with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of advertising saying, trust science, trust science. But what I started noticing is that we only trust science when it benefits corporate America. There is a preponderance of science that tells us point blank that GMO foods cause cancer. They're not good for you. And yet 96% of agriculture is chemical farming using GMO foods. About only 4% of grocery sales are actually organic. So this to me was a problem. So I really felt that I had to do something. Like, I can't just sit on the sidelines while organic farms and small farms who put quality at the top of their list. I can't just watch them get wiped out without actually doing anything and see the whole market trend towards corporate ag, because it's not good for us as people. And it really reminded me of the type of economics and business models I saw in the healthcare industry, which is that if we allow our society to be run in a way where the only thing we care about is economics and margins and producing things as cheaply as possible to produce the maximum amount of profit, this is not good for us. This is not good for us as people. But yes, it's excellent for corporate America. Really good if you're an executive of one of these companies or a shareholder. In that case, it's awesome. But as an everyday individual, it's not that awesome. So this all seemed, a couple of years ago when I started talking about food resiliency and supply chains, people just called me a conspiracy theorist and everyone thought I was crazy. And yet here we are 2 years later, it is front page news. War and inflation are driving up food prices, and everyone is kind of forecasting that food scarcity is going to be a major issue. So I mentioned this a second earlier, globalized supply chains are easily disrupted by economic turmoil. Right now, because of the war in Ukraine, prices of fertilizers are skyrocketing, and that means that many farmers aren't going to get the fertilizers that they need, and therefore there might be food scarcity. Even in the US, some of you might be shocked to hear that there's many areas of the US where there's food scarcity. That's not okay. What does it mean to be American if we're not even feeding our own people? So this is something that we need to think about. I also started learning a lot about the lack of resiliency of our food supply chains. I was recently speaking to a farmer in New Jersey, and she said, she made a brilliant point. She said, organic farmer, she runs a CSA, they have about 300 members, and they're our next door neighbor in our for our New Jersey farm. Called Genesis Farms. They've been organic for 35 plus years, really, really wonderful people. So I went to visit them, and the lady Judy there said something really brilliant. She said, we could grow really, really high quality garlic here. Like, this is the Garden State. We have wonderful soil here. But if you go to the grocery stores, all the garlic here comes from China. So think about that from two perspectives. Number one, climate change. Why are we spending the fuel costs to ship garlic in from China when it can grow right in our backyard? And so this isn't about racism. You know, some of my best friends in the world are Chinese. This isn't about saying anything against China whatsoever. I'm talking about building smart, resilient economic decisions. And in times of crisis like this, now we have this global crisis happening. It's causing oil prices to rise. We're having all sorts of supply chain issues with cargo ships stuck in the ports. And I went to ShopRite the other day, and there was an entire section of the cream cheese section that was empty. And I was like, what are we seeing here? It made us start thinking about the idea that, why can't we just grow our own garlic? Our farmers here are losing their shirts, they're going bankrupt, and they're not able to make any money at all. Why can't we just source things locally? Why can't we create local jobs? Why can't we make sure that if there's massive food shortages and crises, that we actually build resilient local supply chains to provide for ourselves, our families, and our local communities? So this is no longer a drill. It is now front page news, and I really feel that it behooves everybody to start thinking creatively about what we can all do about this. So with that, you know, I'm really excited to be speaking to young people at SUNY Orange today, because you all have your whole lives ahead of yourselves. And most importantly, you still have the opportunity to steer the course of your education, to think about what do you actually want to devote your life to. So I absolutely love this quote, be the change you wish to see in the world, because the fact of the matter is, if we're waiting for corporations and governments to save us, it's simply not going to happen. Those incentives aren't there. There has been a really blurring of the lines between political interests and corporate interests. And guess what? Corporate America is making a lot of money based on the way things currently are. So the economic incentive to change and build different type of economies doesn't make sense. If you ask a corporation, how do we fix this problem? They're never going to tell you, let's build local resilient economies, because they're going to say there's no money in that. There's no money in doing a small farm. They're going to say, I don't know anything about the economics of organic farming. We have 40 years of experience doing chemical farming. It would cost me billions of dollars to change my actual strategy. So we have to start getting smart about the fact that these big corporations are not nimble enough to steer the ship quickly, to make decisions quickly enough to support us in these times of rapid crises and rapid change. So this really led me to believe regeneration is what's super important. So what is regeneration, right? Like, everyone is, you know, a lot of people are talking about regenerative agriculture these days. It took me a while to even wrap my head around what that meant, because as a former banker, I loved agriculture and being on farms, but did I really understand the specifics of it? No. So I really had to think through, and I had to understand and get down to the bottom of, philosophically, what is regeneration? So the technical definition of regeneration is to be reborn anew, to heal and grow again after being damaged. So what I really wanted to work on as an entrepreneur, as a very mission-driven entrepreneur is to think through, what can I do with my business? What can I do with the wealth that I'm going to create from the cannabis industry, from working here, in order to heal and repair the damage that has been done in these two sectors that are really close to my heart, which are healthcare and agriculture. And both of these are at the heart of human wellness. So to really understand how can we build sustainable models around wellness that are backed by both a resilient agricultural system and a resilient wellness system, I started studying a lot more about Ayurveda. So as I mentioned earlier, Ayurveda is something that I grew up with. It is the sister science of yoga. So imagine if there was a complete holistic medical science that was kind of like the wellness version of yoga. That is what Ayurveda is. So it actually provides personalized mind-body healing. It's been used for over 5,000 years consistently. It was never lost. Incidentally, there was a huge attempt to colonize and dismantle it. As most of you know, probably know that India used to be a colony of Britain for a few hundred years. And when the British ruled India, it is a well-documented fact that a tool of war that they deployed was to try to dismantle India's ancient education system. And this is actually documented that in the House of Lords, some of the British leaders were saying some things such as, if we truly want to subjugate the Indian subcontinent, we've got to dismantle their ancient education system and make them believe that everything that is foreign is better than their own. So in 1866, they banned Ayurveda altogether. And in 1933, they banned cannabis. Why? Because cannabis was one of the 700 medicinal plants mentioned in Ayurveda. So it really goes to show you that for the last several hundred years, there's been this systematic dismantling of some of the indigenous medicine systems. And, you know, my personal belief is that it's because there's no money in it. If you can grow your own cannabis in your backyard and heal a bunch of things, if you can grow your own turmeric, you can grow your own ashwagandha and ginger and tulsi and all sorts of other fabulous medicinal herbs, if you really had the knowledge to be able to do that in your backyard, would you be spending money on Tylenol? Would you be spending money on Advil? Would you be spending money on Robitussin? Probably not. So plant-based medicine does not make money for big pharma. That is kind of my thesis on some of the reasons that it's kind of been dismantled. But the thing I found extremely interesting about my research into Ayurvedic medicine was the history of cannabis. And this really excited me more than anything else I think that I've ever learned in my life. When I started researching and realizing that cannabis has been revered in ancient India as a sacred galactic plant for thousands of years. So at the very beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I was like, you know what? The Indians have been using cannabis for thousands of years. I need to know who said what, you know, what written documentation do we have? How do I know more about what the ancients were doing with cannabis and what their opinion was? So we found over 8 ancient texts talking about cannabis, over 200 unique medicinal formulas where they were always pairing cannabis with other herbs in very sophisticated formulations for things like diabetes, meningitis, Parkinson's disease, like, you know, real diseases. And of course, the typical sleep and aphrodisiacs and all those other things that we hear about even in the modern times. One of the most interesting things that I found was that cannabis was part of the our most sacred creation myths that really talk about the origin of the universe. So one of the creation myths references the fact that cannabis was actually a galactic plant that was brought to planet Earth to heal both people and planet. And one of the Vedas, which is one of the most revered scriptures in Hindu philosophy, actually describes cannabis as one of the 5 most important plants on Earth. So I really started thinking about this philosophically. You know, I mentioned this earlier on the slide where we talked about the market size of cannabis and how I was just like, you know, what's really going on here? It seems like people have a very strong attachment to this plant. And I really wonder what's actually going on. So when I started reading these ancient creation myths, my mind was totally blown. I was like, wow. So the ancients said that it was brought here to heal both people and planet. I wonder if we could actually build a business model that lives up to that directive. And so that's what I really realized, that it can. Cannabis has an incredible amount of regenerative power in multiple different ways. So we can regenerate people through very healing medicines, such as the lost medicines that I just described. We can use cannabis to support a broader organic agriculture practice. There hasn't been a cash crop like cannabis in this entire lifetime of farmers, right? I mean, a farmer the amount of money you can make growing cannabis compared to tomatoes and corn is just substantially different. So allowing farmers the opportunity to have one great cash crop could then allow you to have the abundance to invest in a much broader organic regenerative farm that also produces food, other medicinal herbs, etc. I was actually also shocked to hear about the environmental benefits, about carbon sequestration. So cannabis actually has the power to heal the planet through regenerative agricultural practice. Next, the community. I mean, the war on drugs obviously has been really hard on our society, and cannabis has the power to actually regenerate that. And then economic wellness as well. What about distressed communities? What about distressed farmers, distressed people who have lost their families due to the war on drugs? There's so much power to do good with cannabis. And it was just absolutely flooring me that, look, we can do this in a way that is both profitable and good for society. And it's extremely important to be having these conversations now as we're building the whole cannabis industry from scratch and getting involved in policy work and speaking to regulators about what's important to us. So I want to quickly deep dive into each one of these sectors. So at Veda Farms, this is really how we're thinking about it. We believe that cannabis has the potential to be truly disruptive from a medicine perspective. We really think of ourselves as looking to create plant-based alternatives that are based in cannabis from a variety of different types of pharmaceutical drugs, from Xanax to Ambien to Prozac to Adderall. Cannabis and other medicinal herbs that will be grown on our farm can absolutely serve as alternatives for many people from whom these pharma drugs aren't working anyway. So if this is not meant to be medical advice, if you're on any one of these drugs, like I don't mean to be judgmental in any way, but I am saying that alternatives exist and people aren't talking about them enough. I also know that by having this business model where we're producing cannabis-based products, we can also simultaneously invest in growing other things on each of these farms, and to make sure that also high quality organic food is growing in our local communities without us having to bend over backwards and figure out all the margins of it, because we have one cash crop, cannabis, that kind of covers our expenses. So for example, on our 500 acres that we have in Bethel, New York, in Sullivan County, 100 acres of that is agricultural land. We're going to be able to grow about 1 acre of cannabis to start, maybe 2 to 3 maximum. So that means we have 90 plus acres of agriculture that we can put to work, since we're already building agricultural teams, to grow other things, to make sure that if there's an apocalypse scenario, our local communities are resilient. And it doesn't even just have to be about apocalyptic scenarios. Food prices are rising from an insane amount. So if we can produce locally grown, cheap, high quality food, this is going to benefit the greater good in a major way. Of course, there's also a lot to be said about regenerating the planet, because through regenerative agriculture, you can do a lot to support healing the air and the soil. So at Veda Farms, we believe in plants grown in natural sunlight. We are not planning to grow indoors. We will have agricultural greenhouses to support our plants in getting the right protection from the elements. But we believe that having a sun and soil grown regenerative model will allow us to build soil health and fertility through crop rotation. This is important because over time, through regenerative agriculture techniques, You don't need to rely on fertilizers that are coming from the Ukraine. You're building such great soil through, and you're building such regenerative and robust local biodiversity that you don't need to have all those additional inputs. So this actually heavily reduces your costs to produce cannabis over time. So it reduces the cost of your inputs substantially. You can protect biodiversity this way. We're also going to have irrigation systems that are designed to ensure water conservation. And of course, there's carbon sequestration, whereby cannabis plants are extremely efficient at vacuuming carbon out of the air and into the soil. And we're also going to be pursuing the Sun and Soil Regenerative Cannabis Certification, which was invented by a bunch of regenerative farmers out on the West Coast. To further highlight this point, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this slide here. So we've got to be cognizant of the fact that there are many, many, many different ways to grow cannabis. And the three major categories are outdoor, greenhouse, and indoor. So now let's just take a look at what that means from a sustainability point. I mean, I think the chart on the left just speaks for itself. This chart is showing carbon emissions per pound of cannabis flower that's grown. And the reason the carbon emissions are so high for indoor cultivation is because we're creating indoor farms. So there are companies that are creating several acres of indoor farming. So think about that. I mean, I've heard that some of these companies are paying more than $150,000 per month on just electricity bills. And when you ask them why they're doing this, they're saying because we need to create a consistent product. So if you're a medical marijuana company, I kind of get that. Okay, fine. If you're making this product for a cancer patient, sure, fine. Make it consistent. But as we transition into adult use, my question to humanity is this: is this a price that we're willing to pay so that people can have a consistent joint at the end of the night? I would argue no. They're telling us that half the world is going to be underwater or whatever it is by 2050, but we're allowing recreational cannabis companies to kind of piss in the pool of the general environment to grow consistent cannabis for people to smoke recreationally or from an adult use perspective. This doesn't seem right to me. And this really goes back to what I was saying earlier on the fact that we've got to start transitioning to this model where we view it more like wine. Is wine ever consistent season to season? No, and it's okay. Nobody cares. In fact, there's a whole culture around the fact that, you know, there's vintages from each specific season, and you get to experience the beauty of what Mother Earth produced that summer or that season. Greenhouses are also a great way to grow, still substantially better than indoor, a little bit worse than outdoor in the fact that you do have infrastructure there. However, you know, that really supports an agricultural business to have a greenhouse and make that sustainable, because for obvious reasons, an outdoor crop could get wiped out pretty quickly. And then there really isn't any abundance to help ourselves or anybody else. So I tend to feel that greenhouses are the way to go. And I know that I'm going to do everything in my power once we launch as a brand to build awareness around the sustainability impact of indoor cannabis. I guarantee you, if consumers actually knew, if they actually could see this chart, my bet would be that most people would say, no way, let me get regenerative cannabis that's grown in greenhouses sustainably with sun and soil so that I can get the benefit of an organic product, and I can support climate change mitigation with my dollars. And then, you know, as a business owner, I also have to think about the profit margins. And frankly, the profit margins are far superior in outdoor and greenhouse because your costs are simply that much lower. You're not spending millions of dollars building an indoor farm when sunshine and soil are both free. And you know, I don't mean that soil is really free because we have to spend money to regenerate it and all that stuff, but you get the point of what I'm trying to say here. Moving on, really huge opportunity to regenerate communities by hiring. And this is something very important to Veda Farms. We want to make sure that the jobs in our company are reserved for people who have been historically hurt by the war on drugs. And this to me includes two huge categories. First of all, people of color obviously have been much more disproportionately impacted than any other demographic. And they deserve to have the lion's share of these opportunities, especially because it makes absolutely no sense that people are still rotting in jail for cannabis offenses while people like me are now getting into the industry and have the opportunity to, run a business legally. The other sector that I think that people don't talk about as much, but are also very, very harmed by the war on drugs, are farmers. Farmers used to grow cannabis, both hemp and cannabis itself. Those people lost their jobs. Also, a lot of farmers have been keeping this industry alive. I know I was recently on the West Coast in Humboldt County, meeting some of their best OG growers out there. And what I learned from meeting them is like, these are farmers. They're salt of the earth people. They are extremely intuitive. They're business owners. And yeah, they just happen to be growing a crop that has been illegal for a while. But I really pulled my heartstrings a bit because of my love for agriculture and the need for building jobs for local farmers as well. Finally, regenerating local economies. So our intention is really to work into this broader ecosystem of cannabis tourism that's happening in New York, which I think is absolutely amazing, right? Like New York is the biggest market in the world. We have the most sophisticated cannabis customers in the world. Of course, tourism needs to be a huge thing, but there's a lot of big implications to cannabis tourism, I believe. Not only are we generating substantial tax revenue for the local communities in which we operate, tourism revenue can drive abundance for a lot of local businesses. In Bethel, where we are, for example, that is the town where the Woodstock Festival originally was in 1969. So the fact that our cannabis business is going to be there attracting tourists to hopefully come and visit us when we're allowed to have that happen. They're going to go spend money at restaurants. They're going to stay at hotels. They're going to be doing all sorts of things while they're there. And that's really going to help. We also think we're going to be creating a lot of jobs in a lot of ancillary industries. I know that I'm hiring people that are operating across a long list of different industries, everything from construction to electricity to irrigation, to sourcing organic food from local farms, to sourcing organic manure from local farms. There's all sorts of local partners that I absolutely need in order to sustainably run my business. And allowing cannabis companies to really flourish in this tourism type of aspect can really have the power to regenerate local economies as well. So all in all, I really believe that there's much more to the cannabis plant than just getting high. This is about much broader implications for how we can build sustainable, resilient models that actually support us as a community, as local New Yorkers, in having the things that we need to feel sustained. So as my parting words, I will just mention a few quick things of words of wisdom and advice. If I were in your shoes and if I were in college again and I can do it all over, I think I would be making extremely different decisions. When I was in college, I just wanted the coolest job that made me look cool, and studying economics at the University of Chicago, that was going into Wall Street. I really wasn't thinking at that point about how can I add value to the world? How can I fix some major global problems? And I also want to say back in 2010, the world wasn't in as bad of a place as we are today in 2022. So given the atmosphere that we're all kind of dealing with right now, my first piece of advice to all of you would be devote your life force to the greater good. You can find people who are doing good things in the world and really align with their vision. And I guarantee you it's going to make you feel a lot better at the end of the day when you found a job where you really feel like you're adding value. One of the things that prompted me to leave corporate America to go do a very scary thing, which is leave to start my own business. And every day I face fear about a lot of different things. And I never had fear like this before because everything's on my plate. But the thing that I really did not like about corporate America is I just felt like I wasn't making a difference. Whether or not I came to work, those banks would continue functioning. And I just felt like I was a cog in the wheel. And I was a cog of a wheel that I didn't really feel that passionate about what they were doing. So I felt like my life force was getting devoted to something I didn't really care about. And that created a lot of anxiety on a spiritual level. And so today, I feel good every single day, regardless of how hard my day is, because I know that I'm doing my absolute best to not just build a very profitable business for myself so that I can pay my employees, so that I can produce a great product, pay myself, but also so that I can solve some of the big problems facing the world today. My second advice to all of you is this is a really exciting opportunity to move into the cannabis industry. You will have opportunities to gain skills that can be transferred to a bunch of different things. So we really want to be thinking about how are you getting transferable skills? Look at the California market. They've totally crashed. I was recently out there. I heard that cannabis is being sold at $300 a pound out there. The cost to produce a pound of cannabis is around $350 to $400. So they're selling at a loss. So we want to make sure that if there's a disaster and New York screws up its market as well, just like California did, you want to make sure that you have good transferable skills that you can get jobs elsewhere as well. So make sure you're getting a job that's allowing you to get transferable skills at a mission-driven company, because those jobs are always going to be there. There's always going to be agriculture. There's always going to be environmental companies. These sectors are on the rise. And so if there is a downturn in this industry, you're going to be resilient in the long run with skills that will allow you to get jobs elsewhere. And finally, I encourage all of you to find inspiring mentors that show you that conscious capitalism is possible. It is a myth to think that if you do good in the world, that you're automatically going to be poor and that you're not going to honor your shareholders. I challenge any entrepreneur to rethink that question if that's what they actually think, because that is what conscious capitalism is all about. It's about being smart and saying, okay, I'm going to tax myself to do all of the above. I'm going to have a quadruple bottom line business that cares about its customers, cares about its shareholders, cares about the environment, and cares about profit as well. So we don't need to kill capitalism here, but we do need to rethink how we're doing it. And we need to find people who are just being that change, as I mentioned earlier before. So if I were in your shoes and in college again, I would be doing a lot more work to figure out who's doing work that actually inspires me. Who do I want to be in 15 years? I didn't do so much of that. I was just kind of going with the flow. I was going with what I thought what people told me was cool at the time. And I didn't really think through those questions in as much detail as I wish I had. So with that, I will pause and end and take some questions. I encourage all of you to get very excited about the opportunities the cannabis industry has to offer. And I encourage all of you to be rebels and revolutionaries. Make this opportunity count. Work for a company that allows you to service the greater good. It is possible. We are working with a sacred galactic plant that was brought here to heal both people and planet. Make sure you're making decisions that allow you to operate at the intersection of both profitability and the greater good. So thank you so much. And I will pause there.
Okay. Well, thank you very much there, Smrita. That was a phenomenal talk. And again, I have to thank you for being one of those mentors and being a role model for people to follow, and being an inspiration for others that want to go into this business, and all the rebels out there as well for this business. I did have a couple of questions, though. I love the fact that you talked about how many different venues that cannabis can help to support and regenerate, not just even with the soil, but financially, socially in our communities. But again, that's at the cost of the big pharma. And so because you have that insight of, the pharmaceuticals and the healthcare system from the Wall Street experience, could you maybe highlight what it is that Big Pharma is doing now to kind of compensate this new opportunity that is within medicinal cannabis, and what they're trying to do, I guess, to either get into the business or, try to make sure that their profits are not impacted?
So that is a great question, and something that I have been quite focused on since 2018. So I started working on this business model in 2018. In 2019, we launched our first CBD brand, which is called Veda Warrior. And our intention was to create a replacement for people's Xanax. So as I was building my CBD business, I really got to learn a lot about what we're up against from a pharmaceutical perspective. So some of the things I learned is that there are a lot of let's just say, safeguards built in within the system to kind of to kind of block things that could be truly disruptive to big pharma. What do I mean by that? The FDA is the body that is in charge of regulating things like CBD, hemp, cannabis, so on and so forth. Now, there is a preponderance of scientific evidence that proves that CBD, hemp, and other cannabinoids, cannabis, of course, have a substantial amount of medicinal benefits. But what is the FDA saying? They're simply refusing to opine on it. So until the FDA opines on the safety and efficacy of these compounds, we're not really allowed to make any medical claims. We're not allowed to advertise it on Facebook. We're not allowed to really make a big medicinal healthcare type of marketing push, simply because the FDA hasn't said anything. But that's their opinion. They've just decided to not opine on it. We've seen from the whole vaccine thing that if they really wanted to, they absolutely could set a couple of meetings and regulate something if they wanted to do that. But they have shown a huge reticence to doing that. And my personal opinion is because it's disruptive to the people that they get all their funding from. Most of the funding for the FDA and the CDC come from big pharma. So the idea that these institutions are not linked, that's just silly. Let's just call a spade a spade. Moreover, recently, I've been having a very close eye on seeing when does big pharma start making acquisitions into the cannabis world. And recently, I saw Pfizer made there was a $6 or $8 billion acquisition of GW Pharmaceuticals, and that headline really caught my attention because I was like, wow, see, I knew this was going to happen because obviously the science is absolutely there. And yeah, so I absolutely think that is the first of many pharmaceutical acquisitions we're going to see focused on the medical side. I do also think that pharma is going to be predominantly focused on isolating and patenting things. So what they really want to do is to isolate specific cannabinoids, patent it, and say, now I own this. For example, GW Pharmaceuticals did exactly that. They were the first ones to isolate the CBD compound all by itself, and they created a patent around it, and they say, now we own this cannabinoid, and now nobody else is allowed to sell a product that just has that one CBD compound. Now, I think that I absolutely disagree in a major way with this kind of business model, because they didn't invent CBD. This was invented by nature. So what's next? Are there somebody going to patent water and start charging us for that? I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent to set, to allow specific pharmaceutical companies to come in and patent individual cannabinoids. Because what does that do to farmers? That means that we can't grow this anymore. We've seen Monsanto do exactly that thing, and this was a huge assault against farmers. They said that we're going to genetically modify all these things, and even if it flies in because a bird pooped in your farm, you are now going to owe us money for life. So there's a huge risk of that happening in the cannabis industry. And something that I started worrying about when a company called Phylos, which was basically creating a genetics library for the cannabis industry. And for years, they had advertised themselves as like the people's friend who were just doing a service to humanity by creating a library of cannabis genetics. They sold themselves to Monsanto. Now, that is extremely dangerous. Now, Monsanto can go and patent any one of those cannabis strains, which again, they did not invent. They were bred by master growers who risked their lives to keep this alive. And now if they find that strain, they can basically take your farm. So I'm very, very concerned about this whole idea of patenting within this industry, specifically in the world of plant-based medicine. And this is something I'm keeping an eye on heavily, and a reason that I'm extremely involved in agriculture and cannabis policy making, because if I catch wind of this, I want to do everything I can to raise awareness, to say, nope, we cannot allow these companies to come in and say that they can patent cannabis genetics and that farmers and people, other people can't grow them, because who's to say where you got this strain from? You know, like who's to say that any one company, any one corporation should be able to own the magic of creation? This is an ancient plant that's always been there. So we've really got to make sure that we protect it from some of these corporate interests.
Well, thank you very much there. And we also have another question from the online audience from a Dr. Miriam, one of our own. Jennifer, you can unmute and ask your question if you'd like, and you might be able to even share your screen or show the video.
Okay, hi. For some reason, I'm not able to show my video, so sorry about that. But thank you so much for such a beautiful talk. I really enjoyed that, and I loved how you were asking people to, do something that's really meaningful with their life. So that was great. I actually had two questions, one just kind of out of curiosity. You mentioned that you were thinking about doing some tourism. I was just kind of curious how that might work. Like, you're going to have like maybe camping, or how are you going to do that? And then my other question was, what lessons have you learned from other states about the cannabis industry, and how are you going to apply the lessons you've learned to your own business model?
Sure, two great questions. So how is the tourism going to work? So what my dream really was to create an atmosphere on a farm whereby, think of it from a consumer's perspective, say leaving New York City, where I lived for 11 years, and we all know it could be a stressful place to be. So imagine leaving the city as a stressed out New Yorker and arriving at a beautiful farm in upstate New York. I wanted to create this experience whereby you can just fully immerse yourself in what it feels like to live this beautiful wellness lifestyle that's rooted in organic farming and experiences in nature. So at the heart of all things, we really think of ourselves as an experiential wellness company. And so the whole system of Ayurveda. So Ayurvedic medicine is really around a lot of things. It's around having a clear mind through mind, body, spirit practices like yoga, meditation. It's about eating good food. There's a huge focus on locally grown in Ayurveda, because Ayurvedic medicine would say we're all made out of 5 basic types of energy that are philosophically known as fire, water, air, space, earth, the elements. And when you eat foods that are made from similar elements as you, it's more energetically aligned to your body, and therefore it is healthier for you. So we wanted to create an experience where you could just live that. It's really hard to educate anyone on just changing your lifestyle by burying you with blogs and Instagram posts. Like, I really don't think that that's a good way to educate anyone on it. So I think that my customers are going to come to Veda Farms because they're looking for cannabis. They want to experience cannabis. But I want them to walk away with knowledge on how cannabis is actually part of an entire pantheon of medicinal herbs and other holistic practices like yoga, like meditation, like just spending time in nature. So the ecosystem that we really want to build is to have our farms. We want to be able to process and create products by ourselves using a lot of traditional medicine making techniques, herbalism techniques, combined with modern science to make sure we can scientifically study everything. We want there to be an apothecary that sells our cannabis-based products as well as many other medicinal products that don't include cannabis. We would love for there to be an on-site consumption license on the farm so that there could be a restaurant that features infused meals and where you could also sit down and consume cannabis with the grower and really learn about who they are and who is it that grew this product and what the strain is and the whole story around it. And definitely we want to create a lot of sustainable cabins within the woods. And we have, almost 400 acres of woods on our farm. And we want to show and just prove to you that you can build very sustainably with cannabis. So all of our buildings are actually going to be built out of hempcrete. So that's another business model that I've been looking into a lot, which could be a whole other lecture and very different from the cannabis business model. But these are things that I just want to build and prove by example that, look, this is possible. And I guarantee you that after 3 to 5 days on my farm, people will just start thinking a little bit differently and just saying, look, we're not on Mars. We're 2 hours outside of New York City. It is possible. We can live resiliently, we can live sustainably, and we can live in ways that are regenerating our local economies. So that is really what we're trying to recreate. And think about Napa. Nobody goes to Napa to see one farm. Everybody wants to see many farms. So I'm already working a lot on creating alliances with like-minded local farmers to say that when customers come and visit us, we want them to go visit a variety of different farms. And we want all of the craft farmers in the Catskills to really feel like our farm can be a home for them, so that we can do tastings, so that we can do experiences with their growers. And I think that kind of model benefits everyone. It benefits me because people will be coming to my farm to consume that. It benefits our partner farmers because they're generating revenue and brand awareness. But again, by helping each other, and rather than elbowing each other out of the way, which is traditional economics, I really feel that by having the agricultural cannabis companies kind of create these coalitions of craft farmers, because any one farmer is never going to win against the big cannas of the world. Like, we're just not, we don't have the scale, we don't have the funding. But if we act as an industry, we can together create the Catskills craft cannabis industry. And that's what we're really looking to do. And then you asked another great question around what are our lessons learned from California? I mean, other states in general. So California is something I spend a lot of time and effort learning about. I spent a couple of weeks out in the Emerald Triangle just a couple of months ago. And I have to say, it absolutely broke my heart what I saw. These farmers are some of the most talented cannabis growers in the entire world. They have been running a multi-billion-dollar economy with no help, no infrastructure, no support from any type of industry. You can't use accountants, you can't use lawyers, you can't use anything. And on top of that, they've been terrorized by the police in major, major ways. People have lost family, they've gotten killed. And these people have put their lives on the line, keeping this industry alive. And the way that California rolled out its legalization model basically wiped out the craft growers. And the big cannas of the world, they're able to sustain, they're able to stay alive if the prices drop really low in a year or two, because they're so well funded that they can survive that economic downturn. But a farmer cannot. A farmer cannot, like, one bad yield, one bad season could ruin you as a farmer. So what I saw was some of these very talented growers who actually, you know, it's not like they have a spiritual practice or anything. They're not religious, but the way they talk about the cannabis plant just pulled at my heartstrings, because cannabis is a spiritual plant at the end of the day. If you spend enough time with her, you're going to start having some thoughts about the cosmos and the universe and our place, and are there aliens, are there not aliens? Every stoner in the world has had that thought at some point. You start talking to some of these cannabis farmers and you just discover these beautiful souls. And the fact that they were just absolutely crushed and on their knees from an economic perspective broke my spirit. And what I learned from that is that we must act as a coalition in terms of craft cannabis growers. And that's something that they unfortunately did not have on the West Coast, because it was so hush-hush for so long. The farmers didn't have the luxury of just having a symposium or a conference and just openly talking about this. You could have gotten shot, you could have gotten killed. So they had this very, very hush-hush type of community, which prevented them from being able to create these very, very strong, strength in numbers type of resilient local economies. And since New York is starting fresh and has seen that this has happened, I think that we would like to start fresh, being like, nope, we've got to act as an industry and we've got to have a voice as a collective, because any one of us alone absolutely cannot weather the storm. But if we collectively use our voices as local farmers and people who are generating abundance, not just for ourselves, but all of our local communities, then we can make a case to regulators that they must step in to save us if something really bad happens. And so that's what their advice to me was. And I was asking all these farmers, like, what can I do to support a better economy in New York and New Jersey? And that's what they said. They're like, become an activist day zero. get to know your regulators, make sure they know you exist, and create strong alliances. And I'm actually trying to create strong alliances with the West Coast as well, because we have wonderful organic farmers in New York and New Jersey, but people don't necessarily have as much background in growing cannabis. So we can use them as mentors, but they don't know our climate. So as good as they are in Humboldt and Mendocino, that could mean something or nothing in New York. So at Veda Farms, we're creating these multidisciplinary teams where substantially we want our team to be local because we believe in creating local jobs, but we are bringing in a whole crew of master growers who have been growing cannabis day in and day out on the West Coast and also on the East Coast since the 80s, longer than I've been alive. And I think that's really important. Secondly, I think it's really important to focus on brand. If you are building a business model whereby all of your sales are coming from wholesale business to business prices, then you're going to be at the mercy of market prices. So people are mentioning insane numbers on the price per pound that New York is going to command. So I think high quality flower that's grown indoors in New York, in California, I've been hearing around $1,500 a pound. A variety of different numbers are thrown out there, but let's say it's around $1,500 a pound. In New York, they're thinking that could be $4,000 a pound or more in these first few markets. Now, our first few years of a legal market. In Massachusetts, they legalized in 2019. They're still enjoying nearly $4,000 per pound for high quality flower. Now, can we sustain this forever? Absolutely not, because for obvious economic reasons, as you have more growers over time, the overall supply will increase, prices will go down. So you really want to think through this in the long run. How are you going to build a resilient business model that even if the prices crash, you're going to be able to stay afloat anyway? So even though I'm hearing insane numbers in New York, in my financial model, I'm measuring what happens when prices crater out, like cannabis, like California, where it could be as low as 300 or as low as 1,500, still a lot lower than what we're expecting now. And the other interesting thing is the consumer price of cannabis doesn't seem to change after legalization happens. Now, whether you're a college student buying cannabis on campus, like I was back in 2006 or today, if you're going to a retail legal dispensary, a price of an eighth is around $50 to $60. That is an average price. I mean, it stays around that. So as an industry, we want to kind of make sure that kind of stays there. And that means that if you are building a brand that people like, that people care about, you can kind of hedge yourself against some of these market fluctuations. So that's how we really think of ourselves. We don't want to be the Walmart of cannabis. We want to be craft growers that care about having a number of different craft farmers that are owning a small section of our grow. And that way we can really keep an eye on the quality that we're creating, because we have multiple craft farmers focusing on small batches of cannabis. And we can also cater to New York and New Jersey customers. I mean, I would argue that the lion's share of the cannabis customers in this region aren't necessarily looking for the cheapest possible thing. They're looking for something that's been grown well and that is high quality. And that's where we really see ourselves fitting in.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, Smrita. I really think that also, like, that community you're building is really a great opportunity for the educational component as well, because all of these craft growers are going to need that skilled labor. And I would love to see in this area, again, being so unique position between New York City and Bethel Woods, that would be, creating this cannabis highway that people would be wanting to go to Veda Farms, and we could then supply that workforce, for all of these companies in this area for you there. So thank you. One other question we have from Danielle. How is it possible for companies, pharmacy companies like Monsanto that you had mentioned, to buy the rights for strains, and is the government doing anything about that to make it to where the farmers have the ability to compete with the big pharmacy and the Monsanto and the big ag businesses?
That is such a good question and such an important discussion for us to be having. The government is not doing anything about this. They allowed them to do it in agriculture, and that's still allowed. And that is the concern and the major fear. Because of the fact that there's still a lot of regulatory gray area with cannabis, you're not technically allowed to unless you have a lot of clinical trials like GW Pharmaceutical did, and they patented a specific cannabinoid, CBD. So far as I've heard, you cannot actually patent an entire strain. But let me tell you something, I meet lawyers every day that are actively working on this and priding themselves in that work, and nothing scares me more, because that is not good for the industry. It is not good for well-funded organizations to be able to come in and say, now we own this strain that we didn't even invent, that was probably bred, and either it was a land race that came from this planet Earth, or it was bred over time by some of these master growers. So we're very concerned as an industry about this not happening in cannabis. The government has not historically shown support of farmers on this. They allowed it to happen all over agriculture. And I highly suggest that everybody do some research on the history of Monsanto. It's going to break your heart. I mean, farmers committed suicide over this. They lost their entire way to make a living. And never before Monsanto had a farmer ever paid for seed. Seed comes naturally from your crops. It shouldn't be an expense that you ever have to pay for beyond that very first year you're starting a farm. So I've been thinking about that with our cannabis farm, right? Like the year one, we have to spend like $150,000 on seeds because we don't know exactly what's going to be resilient here. And we don't already have a cannabis grow, so we have to. But over time, that's not going to be a recurring expense. We're going to be able to have certain strains that we're locking away and growing for seed, and we're going to have our own seed. And that is the privilege and the right of a farmer. And the idea that you can patent a seed. And again, I mean, I hate to get too hippie on you guys, but this is the mystery of creation. How can we say that a corporation can patent this? So that's a really good question, and something that many of us who view ourselves as activists, anytime I hear someone talking about patents in the cannabis industry, it just gives me a lot of anxiety. And then I start brainstorming on, how can I use my voice to absolutely block this? Because we have to start using our voices as we the people and band together and make a big stink about this, because it's an absolute travesty what happened in regular agriculture. The reason most farms are growing GMO foods is because once upon a time they got wiped out by this Monsanto thing. A farmer would say, I'm growing these organic crops, and before you know it, from the wind or birds or whatever, I mean, seeds can blow around to neighboring farms easily just because of wind. I mean, I'm not even talking about any conspiracy theories here. Like, this is a natural part of agriculture, is wind blowing seeds around. So if they found that you had Monsanto crops, they could just take your entire profit. They could be like, this is my farm now, and if you can't pay me, then I'm taking your land. And this has happened, and this is not a conspiracy theory. It is baked into the history of America, and we've got to take a page out of the history books and say, first of all, this should not be allowed at all. We should also be banning this type of behavior in agriculture, but we've got to really strong arm the Monsantos of the world out of the cannabis industry before it's too late. And really why I think being an activist is like 50% of my job, because they're still writing these rules and regulations. And a well-known fact is that farmers are just usually too busy to take the time to learn about regulatory changes. So very quickly, big ag will come in, they'll use their high-paid lobbyists to add something to a bill. Nobody will notice because the farmers are too busy tending to their crops, and I don't blame them. It's such a difficult job. I mean, how can you ask them to also read all the laws in addition to managing, their agricultural business? So I don't blame them at all. But typically farmers find out about things after it's too late, after it's already written into law. And therefore, I view my role, as a former banker and someone who, I'm not a farmer by trade, and I want my farmers to be able to do what they do really well. And I view my role as kind of being the one who's out there making sure I'm protecting the entire ecosystem by using my voice. And really raising awareness in opportunities to speak, such as tonight, just to be like, we all need to stop this. Like, we all need to work together. This is an all hands on deck type of situation. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, and just as a quick follow-up, if it is that if you're just the individual and you don't have a business yourself, what can an individual do to help, create some of this change?
So one organization I would love for all of you to follow is an organization called the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. They have a great Instagram at NYCGPA, and you can also look them up, and they have a great website. This is one of the policy groups that I'm involved in that represents farmers getting into cannabis. So specifically, some of the biggest demographics here are hemp farmers who are going to be getting some of the first cannabis cultivation licenses this year. I'm a part of their policy committee, and we do a substantial amount of work on exactly this. We are bringing the agricultural point of view to the cannabis industry. We read every single law. We read every single thing that the Office of Cannabis Management is producing in New York. And I'm also part of some of these policy groups in New Jersey as well. And I'm making it and these groups are actually trying to fight exactly this of like, we don't want to wait till it's too late and the laws are already written and then complain about it, because then it's extremely difficult. Once a law is passed and you want to get a change, good luck. It's going to take you years and potentially a lot of money. So the opportunity really is to start talking about it now. NYCGPA has all sorts of cool events that they're going to be putting on for the remainder of this year that are open to the public. I very much encourage everybody to join and follow along and potentially join some of those meetings. And the one good thing this group also does is makes it very easy to figure out who your local representatives are. So, I mean, it's very old school how to make noise in Albany. Just flooding them with emails and letters actually does make a difference, because they're concerned about votes. And this is an election year. And so in election years, we the people have more power than we normally do. So absolutely make your voice known, but this is an organization that I would very much recommend everybody follow.
Yeah, and that's something too that we can direct you to that NYC GPA information with links and stuff through the cultural affairs afterwards as well. Yeah. And so with this, one other question that we had, and I know again there's some additional information with links and things of supportive data for your talk here that we can get, but one was specific about the GMO foods and the cancer that it potentially causes. The data, was that from scientific journals, or where was that data identified for your talk there? So again, the consumer would be able to know, the impacts of ingesting GMOs.
So yeah, there are a large number of different types of studies from scientific journals that suggest that GMO foods can cause cancer. So I'm happy to follow up with some of those actual studies. This is something that's being talked about a lot right now in the organic farming world, and it is something that is majorly of concern. And really, the thesis around it is the human body just hasn't evolved to the point where we particularly know how to digest all of these genetically modified foods. Additionally, the research also shows, and this is true, that sometimes these genetically modified foods have animal DNA spliced in them. And this is also something that can be proven, and I'm happy to follow up with some follow-up details after this. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you deserve to be told that. You deserve to be told that there's other things being spliced into these things, and they're saying it's to make these crops more resilient or bigger and grow more and whatever. But yeah, these are provable facts that are being talked about in scientific communities.
Okay. Thank you very much there, Smrita. And that looks to be all of the online audience questions there. So I definitely appreciate you for giving us this talk here tonight and kind of wrapping up our lecture series, Cannabis, Changing Weed to a Resource. And Dorothy, I believe you have some announcements coming up here for other cultural affairs activities. No?
Well, the one that I have that's dear to my heart, we will be having a major jazz concert on May 6th, which will highlight the Chris Parker Septet. But I want to really thank you very much for this evening. I think it was extremely educational, and it definitely was a great way to finish our series. So thank you very much for both. And we have to carry on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.